All right, so welcome to New York Video Dharma. I actually was thinking maybe we could discuss before I start talking about the chapter. This is Suffering, chapter 50, the snowballing of deception. Excuse me. I was thinking maybe we could just I'd just like to hear from you guys when we were just doing this meditation where we were trying to notice a little bit. Maybe I'm curious whether anybody notices some of the underlying thoughts, the chatter that underlies our minds as we try and sit and meditate. I think it was John who described it as, and many teachers before John, as there you have when you sit and meditate, you deal with different levels of thoughts, right? There's big thoughts where you're like, you're just, I'm thinking about, what a time tomorrow I got to get up because I have to go to Chelsea before I go to the office at Union Square, where you're following a train of thought where that's very articulate and very clear. And then there's like other levels of thought, right? There's a lower level of thought that even when you're not having a conversation with yourself, there's still sort of like a kind of, I feel like they're almost like mumblings. They're like mental mumblings that kind of go on, a little like murmurs, chatter. It's not necessarily fully formed thoughts, but there's these mental events going on, and I don't know whether there is underneath it there is also like maybe even a lower level kind of just baseline, a level of mental energy that goes on, but I'm just curious. Does anybody notice that? Did any of you notice that just now, or in your meditations in general? Have you noticed the underlying mental chatter, not the big thoughts, not the like full sentences that we say to ourselves in our heads, but mental chatter underneath?
I would say no, but the meditation challenge for me for December is trips. So I tend to go away on a thought trip into not thinking about my day, but maybe going into the past or just whatever. And it's very helpful when I'm in a group with someone leading, because that person's voice, like yours, brings me back. And then I'm like, oh yeah, now I remember what I'm supposed to be doing. But I think that's such a coarse thing that it may be masking what you're talking about, which I'm confident could be happening, but it's too subtle for me to perceive at the moment.
I think a good thing that, when you meditate, going forward, if you can, just try and notice, try and be aware of what happens in between the big thoughts, right? And I think part of the reason I'm asking about this is because I think it's very relevant to what this chapter is about. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're talking about, but often I'm aware of like an underlying mood that I have, which I think can be considered a nonverbal thought. And sometimes, this didn't happen tonight, but sometimes I could even watch thoughts bubbling up out of that mood. And tonight, there's a kind of underlying heaviness that I was aware of.
Mm.
Usually at home with my practice, there's a lot of big thoughts, lots of big thoughts. And I just try to let them go. And I wasn't having them this evening. It was wonderful. But then when you brought up to notice the chatter, I don't know if you were saying notice the chatter caused me to notice the chatter, or if it caused chatter in my head. Because it was very peaceful until you said, notice the chatter, and then all of a sudden there was chatter. It's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's certainly a little bit of, I think that if we meditate for any period of length of time, or we've done it a little bit, right, you notice gaps between the big thoughts. You notice gaps between the sentences that you're talking about. I think that what when you start to notice those gaps, when you start to experience those gaps, a lot of times there is like this underlying chatter. It's like an underlying mental chatter, and it's hard. Like, and I think that it's very low level. It's almost like a white noise of mental thought.
Isn't even noticing a gap in thought?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, I guess, whether you're sitting there and saying, "Oh, I just noticed I'm in a gap right now," in which case you're not. You know, but the actual experience of that gap is something that happens, right? It's just we like get rid of it very quickly by being like, "Oh, there's a gap," you know, or whatever the conversation is. But I would just encourage you guys to think about that and like maybe just try and become aware of it, because this is like, I think, you know, a little bit of the functioning of our neurotic minds, right? When we think about where these thoughts spring from and like what causes sort of the neurosis of ego, which is sort of what we're talking about, or we're going to talk about. It has a little to do with this underlying chatter that I think a lot of times we're not even aware of until you start meditating. Would you say that is your experience?
I find that there are moments, you know, when I sort of reinitiate my meditation practice and I come back to clarity. But that inevitably, at some point after that, I find that I've devolved into dream of one kind or another without even knowing it. And then I suddenly awaken and realize I'm dreaming. And I think these dreams are driven by anxiety. Some anxiety about myself, about the self, this one. And then I notice it, and as soon as I notice it, I'm back. I'm out of it. You know, I've awoken from the dream. And there's a little residue of the anxiety, but a lot of it clears. And then I can sort of rest in that for a little while. And then after some period of time again, I find that I'm dreaming. I've been dreaming for a while. And sometimes I even go to sleep and dream. So, yeah, because there's just constant reawakening and a constant falling back to sleep and then awakening and back and forth. It seems to be the practice.
It seems to me too that this sort of these lower level thoughts are almost like a precursor to the bigger thoughts, right? This lower level chatter kind of is almost where the big thoughts come out of, percolate from, right? And there is and part of the reason of calling the attention to it is noticing that there is a little bit of an anxious quality to it, right? If we had no neuroses and no anxiety at all, resting in the present moment would be probably pretty easy. But we have a constant little chatter, a constant chatter. It's like an emotional mind, thought, emotion chatter, and what it ends up doing is it seems like it spurs on these bigger thoughts, you know. And
I find there's an alternation between the space of awareness, which is devoid of that kind of anxiety, and then sooner or later I find that I've slipped into anxious dream again without even knowing it. And then I awaken from it and I can come back to this kind of clear, empty space of awareness. And that for me is the alternation. It seems as though the anxious thoughts have some kind of life or inertia so that they keep arising out of nowhere.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything they want to share in their experience?
Yeah, I would say that those small thoughts are very tricky because they're always there, almost always. And those big thoughts are easier to track and identify, while those small ones are, you're not aware of them. But in my experience, sometimes when I I realize that I'm thinking, and then when I'm back to the present moment, there's nothing there. There's no even those background or those small thoughts, and I don't know. I just rest in the moment, the present moment, which is amazing. But this doesn't last long, unfortunately. Just maybe a few seconds, and that's it. But this is amazing when you can really rest in the present.
It's almost like a different experience of reality, right? So it's a unfiltered experience. Okay. So, let me talk a little bit about this chapter. And talk a little bit about basic anxiety, which is one of the terms that Chögyam Trungpa uses. So, talking about suffering, and I think that this one, even though he doesn't use the term, I think he's talking about dukkha, which is, I think, better translated as a dissatisfaction, right? Basic anxiety. I like that. Suffering and fear, like these things are all related. But when we're talking about suffering itself and sort of how it comes about, it's this basic anxiety, this basic dissatisfaction that we have. So he talks about it here. He says, sometimes we feel very lonely, and sometimes we feel claustrophobic, and sometimes we feel good. We have companionship, and this is giving examples of where this comes about, this anxiety. We have companionship. We have clothing to keep ourselves warm. We have food in our stomach. We have enough liquid to drink to keep from being thirsty. We feel satisfied. But any one of those satisfactions can subside. We might have companionship, but not a good meal. We might have a good meal, but no companionship. Sometimes we have good food, but we are thirsty. Sometimes we are happy about one thing, but unhappy about another thing. It's very hard to keep together the myriad of things that go on, up and down. It's very hard. It turns out to be quite a handful, quite a project for us to keep everything at the ideal level. It's almost impossible to maintain an even sense of happiness. Even though some of our requirements might be achieved, we still feel anxiety. We think, at this point, my stomach is full of food, but where am I going to get my next meal when my stomach is empty and I'm hungry? I might point out that this is a very basic, natural, animalistic thing, right? Nobody in this room is in any danger of starving. But you know what? When I get hungry, I become like an animal. I eat as much as I can, and I have to stop myself from just eating too much, right? Every meal, pretty much. Unless I'm concentrating on something else. It's I'm hungry, I gotta eat, right? These are very basic, fundamental to who we are, how our nature is. This is what we're talking about. It's just how it manifests in modern life, in our day-to-day lives, right? This is also the monkey brain. We talk about monkey brain or monkey mind and lizard brain. Right? Lizard brain is a fear response. I forget what part of the brain. What part of the brain is lizard brain? Is it amygdala or something? I think it is amygdala. Anyway, and it controls our fear response, our fight and flight stuff, and the monkey mind that's just I'm hungry, I want to eat. I'm cold, I need, how do I prepare so that I don't starve tomorrow? Okay? He goes on to say, I'm completely well equipped with companions now, but what if the person who is presently keeping company with me decides to leave? Now what he's saying is not just the physical needs. It's not just I'm worried about being hungry, or I'm worried about being cold. I'm also worried about being lonely. I'm worried about being loved. He says there are all sorts of jigsaw puzzles in life, and the pieces do not perfectly meet. even if they did meet, which is highly improbable, one chance in a million or less, you would still be anxious thinking, supposing something goes wrong, then what? Right? So there, I think about that, I like the idea of a jigsaw puzzle, like fitting together. Like we're trying to put all of our parts of our lives together like a jigsaw puzzle. And we feel like once we get all those parts, all those pieces in place, we're going to be happy, right? But it doesn't really work like that, does it? We like get something that we were looking for, and then we get something that we weren't looking for, or we get all the things that we were looking for, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, now what? Now it's on to the next thing. What's the next step? Right? This is the basic satisfaction thing of life that I think we're all familiar with, and even in just popular culture, non-Buddhist stuff, we hear about this all the time, right? It's like it's about life is a journey. It's not a destination, because what happens is you go and you work really hard to achieve something, and you get it, and then you are not satisfied. I think it was in, I don't know if it's in Truth or Dare. It was like in a Madonna documentary. And she very simply puts, this is like 20 years ago now, but she's like, I had everything that I wanted. I was like the biggest, musician in the world. I had all the money I could want, all the cars, all the homes. I had a private jet. I had everything that you could ask for. I had success. All the things that I dreamed about, I had. And I still wasn't happy. I think this is right before she started studying Kabbalah and doing a lot of yoga, But, we see that, I think, in our own lives, right? We see that in smaller ways. Maybe we're not, billionaires with private jets and at the top of our careers, but we still see that kind of dissatisfaction regardless of where we are. So there is a natural, automatic pain and suffering. It is not like the pain of a headache or the pain you feel when somebody hits you in the ribs. It's anxiousness. I think it's important to make this distinction, right? When we're talking about pain, we're talking about it's like a low-level pain, right? It's like a subtle mental anguish, a subtle anxiety that is created by this low-level fear. Everybody is neurotic. That neurosis creates discomfort and anxiety. And that basic anxiety is happening all the time. In order to rectify that basic anxiousness, we create heavy-handed situations. We come up with intense aggression. We come up with intense passion. We come up with intense pride. We come up with what are known as the kleshas, the conflicting or confused emotion, passion, aggression, ignorance. We are in a state of anxiety, and each time we try to make ourselves feel better, we feel worse. We might feel better at the time if we strike out with our particular flair or style. But then there is a tremendous letdown and tremendous pain. We feel funny about it. In fact, we feel wretched. Not only that, but we make other people feel wretched as well. So instead of having our own anxiety, we produce a further state of anxiety in others. We generate their anxiety, and they also generate it themselves. And we end up with what is known as a vicious cycle of samsara. So this is basically what happens. What happens with this low-level anxiety, this basic anxiety that we experience. And, one of the things that he doesn't really address here, he doesn't call it as such, but it's really the ego is the mechanism by which we take this basic anxiety and then manifest it in our lives, right? And it's like, and this is like in the Buddhist sense of ego, but it's not totally unrelated to the Freudian sense. But how does that work? So we feel anxious. We feel like those lists of, I'm worried about how I'm going to eat tomorrow. I'm worried about, is my companion going to leave me? Am I going to be lonely tomorrow? Even if I'm not that way right now. And then we create things. It's that fear. Even just starting with the fear, you almost can't really have the fear without this sense of I and me. What do I want? I want to be free of suffering, and I'm afraid that I'm going to suffer. I'm afraid that I'm going to be hungry. I'm afraid that I'm going to be lonely. And that I, even just in the mechanics of the sentence, like that's the mechanism that allows you to connect these fears with things that don't actually exist, right? These fears of the future, these anxiety, this basic anxiety. And that I, that's the ego in there, kind of creating machinations in your head about what do I need to do to avoid these basic anxieties? What do I need to do to avoid being hungry tomorrow? What do I need to do to avoid being lonely tomorrow? You know, this is like, achievement of work, of a career. There's always different ways to go about doing work. You can work because it's something you just love to do, and you just are really present with the work you do. And you can also work with a little bit of anxiety driving you, or a lot of anxiety driving you, depending on how you do it. But why? Why are we anxious to achieve things? Why are we anxious to be better at what we do, or to get a better job, or a higher salary, or whatever it is, to be recognized, right? To be recognized in my field, to be recognized that I do a good job. I want to be recognized that I do a good job. I want to be compensated for the fact that I do a good job. I want all these things, right? But why do I want them? I want them because of this basic anxiety. I want them because I don't want to be hungry or cold or lonely tomorrow. And I feel like if I can go get things, if I can go work hard, then I can do my job well and get paid and have enough money that my family's gonna be okay, and I'm not gonna be hungry, and I'm not gonna be cold, and I'm not gonna be lonely, right? And that's sort of, in a nutshell, is how this whole thing comes about. This suffering, this dissatisfaction. I don't know if there's another chapter on dukkha, but I remember that I read this a lot. This Pema Chodron talks about it a lot. This dissatisfaction. And that dissatisfaction that's motivating a lot of our action, a lot of times we're just not even aware of it. We think, no, of course, the right thing to do is you work hard, you finish your plate, you work hard, you take care of, yourself and your family, and that's the right thing. But it's not always motivated like that. I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but I certainly know for me and other people that I know, where maybe I worked really hard. I'm working really hard. I'm trying to do the best job I can. But in some ways, that can get in the way of me taking care of people around me or myself. Right? My own self-care can kind of go out the window because I'm I got to work. What's motivating that is not compassion for myself or compassion for the people around me. What's motivating that is fear, anxiety about not being adequate. And that not being adequate could lead to me being unloved or lonely. It could mean me being, I don't really worry too much about being homeless, but I worry about not having enough space for my kid to grow up in an apartment with a 1.5 bedroom as opposed to a 2-bedroom. I want a 2-bedroom. If I don't get the 2-bedroom, life could suck. Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. When the kinds of anxieties that I deal with as a real estate agent, it's man, I see these amazing. I'm looking at $10 million properties today for this person, and it's these places are awesome, But is it going to make me happy? I feel like it is. I'm wow, if I could only live in that $10 million apartment, the views would be amazing. I'd have space for 15 kids. It'd be awesome. I'd be so happy. Right? So this is the whole thing about Buddhism and the the First Noble Truth, and what the Buddha figured out is he figured out that this suffering thing This dissatisfaction, this basic anxiety is like really basic to our ability to like be happy or at least not have suffering. It creates all this suffering for us, in the form of this creation of this ego. And yeah, so I guess the question is, so what do we do? What do we do with it? And this is also why I was trying to just call a little bit of attention to this underlying anxiousness, this underlying chatter that we experience sometimes when we meditate, or we can try and become aware of, because it's this basic anxiety that drives so much of the suffering that we experience. It starts really subtle and really small, and it just grows into this fully formed ego with all its neuroses and fears and anxieties. So noticing it, being aware of it, is really sort of the first step. And then, obviously meditation is a great way to work with it. And that's how he ends the chapter. He says, cessation is possible not only for the Buddha, but for us as well. The Buddha's teachings have been handed down from generation to generation, so that right now, right here, we have that information and experience. I was talking to a guy who's a musician friend of mine, and I had worked with him in his band for several years, and he was not always my favorite person to deal with, but he recently started, by recent, a few years ago, he started meditating on a regular basis. He's meditating in the Dalai Lama's lineage. And one of the conversations we had was like, he was listening to like Bob Thurman talking about some stuff or something. I think it was Bob, and he was like, it's amazing, like all the knowledge, the wisdom that these people have. It's like he's getting all these aha moments because he's just learning, starting to study and learning this stuff, and starting to see how his mind actually worked. And I was like, and I was thinking about it, and I told him, I was like, yeah, it's like you have like the wisdom of the ages, like passed down from generation to generation to teachers in the various Buddhist traditions, and they're right there for you to access at any time for like $10 a night. All the wisdom of generations, the 2,600 years of wisdom for like a $10 donation on Tuesday night or Monday night, right? And that's kind of amazing if you think about it. We have these keys. The keys, people have walked this road before us, and they figured stuff out. And they have the keys to the cessation of suffering. And they're just like holding it there, waiting for you to like reach out and go grab it, or at least look at it. And yet, amazingly, because of the dissatisfaction, the anxiety that we propel forward our lives with, we're like, I don't have time for that. I got shit to do. I don't have time for the cessation of suffering. So, what is meditation doing? It's making the time for the cessation of suffering. It's making the time to become familiar with the basic anxiety that drives so much of our lives. And then the last thing I'll say is that what's there when you get rid of that anxiety, when that anxiety is not there, right? If you're able to quell the anxiety for a moment, what are you left with? You're left with being present in the moment. And instead of there being a fear-based motivation for whatever it is that you're doing, there's kind of this warm, dare I call it love, that kind of exists there. It's certainly a compassion, right? There's a warmth, and there's like another option to being motivated by anxiety. But we can only get there if we're able to let go of that anxiety and relax. And that every time that you've ever been with somebody that you loved and thought about them without thinking about yourself, that's kind of what it is. That's letting go of the ego, letting go of your fears for yourself, and kind of, I don't know, being in the moment, experiencing compassion and love. And we can do that anytime we want. Anytime we can think about it. Anytime we can remember to do it. So with that, before we do any questions, I was thinking what might actually be nice to do is, if we pair up, we got 2, 4, 6, 8. If we pair up, I think let's take a few minutes and think about some dissatisfaction that you have in your life. Two things that are dissatisfying to you in your life. 2. I mean, I'm sure we can think of a lot of them, probably, right? And then what I want to do is let's tell our partner what the 2 things that are dissatisfying, 2 of the things. Describe them, and then also maybe take a minute and try and think about why they're a problem. Why is it a problem? And the thing I would suggest is that the reason that if you're like running around and the reason like you give a quick answer as to why you think something is a problem, it's usually not that problem. It usually has to do with this basic anxiety that we experience. That dissatisfaction usually stems from, or always stems from, some sense of fear, some sense of fear of inadequacy, some sense of fear of not being able to eat tomorrow, some sense of fear of being lonely or not loved. And see, maybe you can, maybe you can't, but see if you can trace that back. Those 2 dissatisfactions, can you work with them from where they are right here in your head to where they actually stem from? What really motivates those dissatisfactions? We'll take a few minutes, and then the other person, your job is just to sit and hold space for the person. Just be open, listen to what they have to say. Sound good? And then we'll switch. Okay? All right. I don't know. You guys want to pair off? It's best if you don't know. If you take the person that you know the least. We all know each other a little bit here, but yeah, you can let it go. So it's all one video. Yeah, it's okay. If anybody's gotten to this point in the talk, then they should be doing this themselves at home. Do this yourself at home, or find somebody to do. All right. So we're gonna do hi. Okay, so we're gonna do 3 minutes for each person, starting now. baby stuff. Bringing into the space that I have my studio set up. But it really comes down to it's not really a problem.
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, so my painting has been very, very challenging because just
and I think that the problem with the chat is you're like, I'm afraid that I'm not going to have Jackson knows not there, but that's what you'll future because I came to realize that it's $2 million in a relationship. And so before that, it's there for you to the teacher from the body. I think it's 44 nights last week and the week before. A yogi who was sitting there 35 years. He had only known the guy for 7 years with 35. Tour of college students. It was every there's a cave, you know, he was like, so the worst time I meditated, I just didn't want to cave, I just meditated. It's really interesting that also the beings, the awareness thinking about I don't know, and that for me was my own experience, because I realized that in this relationship with this sentient being, 6 years ago, I was in a relationship. And the relationship is not clear. It's not a campaign. It's also being alone. It's also being not alone. So I thought that was interesting. I have the approaches to labor at what was I called a union job for the last 2 years. I was working 80 hours a week instead of 40 hours. So I essentially done 80 years of work as a normal person. Guys, if you haven't start to wrap up the first person speaking.
Then I can't take credit for it because the rules. This one, access to it, so you could squander it or just kind of have it. So I think that I should. There may be some person who will take care of it. But throughout this very emotional year, I found out that this I did it all along and I was so I don't think I can guarantee that it will continue, but I'm
Guys, if you haven't switched, please switch.
You know, it has positive effects, but it's not transactional. Because I do jobs, I do go so maybe that's the case for you as well. That having lived here like you did, there could be unknown benefits or in the future that will
I just feel this is almost inappropriate. I have said that she doesn't seem interested, so
the solution could be chasing me and never catch one. But I think before doing that, I was sitting here a while ago
right, guys, finish up. What's that? Yes, that's what we're going to do now. Yeah. All right, guys, as soon as you're ready, I think we went a little over, but I think I probably should have limited it to just one dissatisfaction, because we could probably talk about any one dissatisfaction for a very long period of time. Yeah, we can return to the dissatisfaction afterwards at the end. You want to grab the mic? Sure. Thank you.
So I just wanted to respond to what
Yeah.
CT said about dissatisfaction, because that's also my kindergarten level study of Sanskrit, that dukkha, suffering, is a fine translation. Everybody uses it, but another teacher that I know chooses dissatisfaction, and that rings more true for me. But I've been thinking about this a lot because of the season that we're in, and I was thinking about the universality of the teachings, and also that Trungpa Rinpoche was spared the time that we live in with the internet. And so this is a very strange time between Thanksgiving and Christmas, when the country is attempting, as it does annually, to resurrect the economy through conspicuous consumption. And so every day when I look at my phone, I have a huge stream of messages about, and they're expressly designed to make me more dissatisfied than I am, so as to change my behavior. So first there was Black Friday, then there was Cyber Monday, then there was Small Business Saturday, and today was Green Monday. I've never heard of Green Monday before, but as soon as I see these messages, I'm like, whoosh, delete. I don't even look at what it is, because some of you, without going into any detail whatsoever, some of you know that 2018 has been a challenging year for me, and things have resolved themselves, not in a way that's lasting, because that's not how human embodiment works, but in a way that's a lot less of a struggle than 6 months ago was. So I'm willing to say I'm kind of satisfied. I don't need anything at the moment. My job is more satisfying than it has been. I have somewhere to live. I clearly have clean clothes to a degree. I don't have a lot to be dissatisfied about, and I will not allow those people to make me dissatisfied. There's not a blessed thing that I need to buy online or elsewhere for the next 6 months. Nothing. And so, but I think even though Trungpa Rinpoche didn't have to deal with these internet marketers, the teachings are the same. It's like that underlying dissatisfaction is what he was talking about, and PhDs in human behavior now know how to hook into it in a way that they didn't in 1930. But it's in there. And I think the solution remains the same, to recognize this problem with the self and trying to prop it up by making sure that I have all the stuff everyone else has, or all the stuff people expect me to have, me being the operative word, the non-existent me, and so on and so forth, the neurotic me. But I also think that for myself, to be aware that I'm in a culture where this is pushing all the time, I either need to push back, or maybe in some kind of like jujitsu kind of way, just get out of the way and let the blows go past me. It's very interesting. So thank you so much for bringing it up.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of shopping, I feel like it's a really, this is obviously a good time to talk about it too, being the high shopping season. But what's interesting that I find is that there's shopping for as a materialistic endeavor, right? Where it's like, I need to be happier, or I will be happier when I have a Toyota 4Runner, because I need a Toyota 4Runner in New York City for all the camping that I do on the one day off that I have a week. But then there's also an aspect of entertainment, right? So there's I know people close to me and myself, I find that so one of my anxieties is my space, like my apartment. I have a 1.5 bedroom. I have 2.5 people. So we gotta Like I'm like, oh, I need to have more space. So then I go on the internet and I start looking at like different spaces, and there's like legit reasons to have a 2-bedroom if you got a kid, you know, a couple, whatever. You know, maybe you want to have another one, who knows, right? But very quickly, like that can turn from being like, well, let me see what's out there, to like me almost fantasizing about how my life could be if I had this thing, right? And there's just aspects of like entertainment there. It becomes not, I mean, it is always a materialist thing, but there's also like, this is the way I can fill my time. Like, so so if I'm bored, I can just shop. Regardless of whether I buy it, it makes me feel better because I have it. It's actually like, there's like an aspect of just filling time through shopping, browsing for things that I don't really need. Yeah.
I think there's also, I think there are, as you say, there are legitimate reasons to want a certain situation that's been presented to us in television, sitcoms, and whatever else. But I will tell you that when people are armed with determination and clarity, they just make it happen anyways. So there's a really wonderful couple that lives one floor down and across the hall from me that's raising 4 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I assume that there are 2 sets of bunk beds in the bedroom and the parents live in the living room, and maybe they don't love it, but they're really sweet people, and the kids are like super well adjusted, friendly, a pleasure to be around, whatever. So I have no idea how these people are doing it, but I can tell you that it is happening, and I've watched it happen for the last 10 years. So your circumstances, I'm not saying you should be satisfied with your circumstances. Yeah. I am saying that a number of different circumstances can be made to work, but this marketing machine is always telling us that our circumstances could be better and should be better, and we're inadequate if we don't better our circumstances. And that's just not true. We're actually fine, and our circumstances could be different. It's non-dual.
Yeah. And one other thing I just gotta add, which you just reminded me of, in the 1.5 bedroom that I have that was newly renovated when we moved in like a year and a half ago, the previous occupant lived there for over 60 years, raised 3 kids there, and didn't have a shower or a bathtub. He only had a toilet and a sink in the kitchen. Or maybe a sink in the bathroom, I don't know. 3 kids, lived there for 60 years, the exact same space. Mine's a little nicer. I got a full shower, but no tub, and that really bothers me, because you need to have a tub for the kid, like what are you going to do with it? And that's exactly literally what happened right before, for the 60 years preceding my moving into that space. So, to your point. But I'm going to find a 2-bedroom, I'm going to tell you. And it's going to be under $1 million in Queens. In Long Island, it's very hard to do. So, yeah.
Dubai?
Well, that's the plan. Yes. Yeah. It's like, come on.
Oh, no, it's all
There's another aspect which is, another aspect, fear and anxiety of bad circumstance can become an occupation in itself as well. And it's very interior. You go inside, and what can help cure it, or at least temporarily cure it, is to come out and become active in the world and with people and events. And then the anxiety and the depression and the fear lifts. But when one is inside and involved with that kind of fear and anxiety, it becomes a very gripping and involving form of, in a way, I think I can hear Trungpa Rinpoche call it a perverse form of entertainment. It's sort of like watching a really scary movie. And it can also be depression. Depression is the same thing too. Depression is very interior, and you're wrapped up in negative thoughts about yourself, your life, your future. Yeah.
Practically, functionally speaking, right? All the negative emotions that we experience are very self-absorbed, right? They're by nature self-absorbed. The more negative we feel, the more our world closes in on us, and it's just what's going on for us, not for what's happening around us.
Yeah, I think too there have been times in my life when I was very absorbed in happy thoughts, and they can be very self-absorbed as well, and unrealistic.
True.
Sort of, oh, I've got it made. I'm really doing well, and it's all about me, and yeah. So either way.
I guess the link there is the ego, right? In both cases, it's really the ego that is like in full effect, whether it's a negative emotion or the positive emotion. I'm great. I'm awesome. I'm such a wonderful person. I've done so much.
Yeah, I really think of ego as a story about me. And there are all these different stories that I tell and we tell. And I is the hero, the heroine. And I think there is an ego apart from that. It's not that I can tell.
There is some truth in that story, isn't there?
Truth?
Yeah.
I find very little truth in it. For all practical purposes, no. And not only that, but it leads you into very bad places sooner or later.
I think that's the trap, actually, right? Is that the ego gets so good at telling stories, of telling us, like these stories about, well, but there's truth to this. Like, this is like, these are legit things. Like, I need to worry about, like, how I pay my rent. And if I don't worry about how I pay my rent, but it's actually really like it's not about whether or not you're like working or not. It's about like what you feel like you're getting out of it. It's not actually really the important thing to be doing or worrying about.
Ironically, I have a lot of anxiety about the future. I say it's ironic, only because, I'm a Buddhist, like all of us here, and it's all about being in the present. And that anxiety about the future, what's ironic is that I've discovered that if I take a risk in my life, oftentimes something new and illuminating, wonderful, happy, educational, something fresh happens. I call it putting myself in harm's way. That means sort of stepping out into a place that's a little scary. And it's easy to do it in small ways. If somebody offers you an opportunity and you're sort of going, oh my gosh, that's a little scary, and then you do it, and you discover, like, they come and want you to do something in a forum of people that you've never known before, let's say, and you feel exposed and there's some kind of risk, but then something fresh or new happens. So I find that putting myself in harm's way, as I put it to myself, can be very creative. Life is constantly offering me some really major harm's way. And I avoid it. I got my heels dug in, I'm trying not to go there. But I may wind up going willy-nilly. Press the button on the bottom.
So very interesting. There's a Sanskrit word called shraddha, which is often translated as faith, but the translation that I prefer is confidence. And so I'm not sure that the ego is often not helping me, but some concept of I is not always entirely a bad thing. So for example, in the earlier than right now, which is the earlier than early part of my meditation practice, it was a little bit frustrating because it felt like nothing was happening. Like I was putting forth a certain amount of effort to make time for it and sitting, and nothing was changing. And so I think that's the egoic judging mind saying you're wasting your time, why are you doing this, blah, 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 whatever. But there have been isolated instances in the last, let's say, 18 months where something similar to what's happened in the past will arise in my life, and I will, without giving it any thought whatsoever, respond in a way that's more skillful. And I'm inclined in those times to notice them in the same way that we talk about noticing thoughts. And I will think, not, oh, I'm like a superhero now, but just think, whoa, I just responded to that more skillfully than I would have in the past. And that kind of experience gives me confidence that the practice is working. And so on days when I might want to sleep in, or I might not want to sit, or I might want to not go on retreat or whatever, those are the experiences that get me out of bed and get my butt on the cushion. And I think that's a positive expression of the I-ness, if you will.
That's great.
I wish it happened more often, but I'm grateful for what I get. Let's put it that way.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I find it a little bit tricky to identify where I or ego is healthy, as what you said, and when it's insane. Like when worrying about future is okay, and when it's like overwhelming and unnecessary and insane, it's like it's a little bit difficult to understand the line or the border where you should stop.
You know, I think like another way, tell me if this is appropriate, another question people ask a lot are, they're like, well, how can I plan for the future? Like if like, you know, if I'm supposed to be present all the time, and I feel like the part of the answer, there's a couple of ways of looking at it and a couple of answers to it. One is that you probably know better than anybody else when your concerns, when whatever it is that you're worried about or you're working on for the future goes from being something that's productive and like, okay, I have to pack my lunch for tomorrow. So I have to make some food tonight so I can have lunch to bring it to work. When that goes from being like a productive train of thought, just simply in terms of like getting done what you need to get done, and where it crosses over into the realm of anxiety. Like, oh man, you know, instead of like just doing what you need to do, you start thinking, oh man, if I don't get home soon enough to cook so I can like make my lunch for tomorrow, like I'm not going to get enough sleep, or I'm going to have to stay up late to do it, whatever, you know, and I feel like that when it turns from being something that is practical and necessary to being something that is anxiety causing or producing, then you sort of crossed over away from, you know, the practical life side of things to like the ego side, the fear, the anxiety producing, you know, side of things. And I think that's, you know, it can be different for different people where that point is. But I think that it usually comes from like where you start to worry. The signpost, the neon signpost pointing at like where my issues are is when it starts to become when my train of thought about whatever the practical things, like finding an apartment, right? Where it starts to become neurotic or like a cyclical, like almost like repeating the same idea, where it starts to go into fantasy, and that fantasy can be a good one or a bad one. It can be a fantasy about, oh, it would be great to have this, and like, you know, my life would be amazing this way, you know, subtly, but like that. or also like, oh my gosh, I really don't want my life to be like this. What's going to happen if it becomes like that? The moment that it crosses over into that kind of fantasy realm where you're telling stories about what could be happening and how much you like or don't like that, you've probably crossed into that place where ego is sort of taking control and is now telling you stories.
Like projecting the worst case into the future and then freaking out because now I can just see the worst case because I just created it.
And it could also be the best case too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it could be just as entertaining and sort of like taking you away from actually whatever it is that you need to be doing.
Or projecting the best case and then being really unsatisfied because I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
But both of those things are fantasy creations that
Yeah.
don't exist.
Yeah. They're both stories. So, if nobody has any other burning comments, then I feel like this would be a good time to stop. All right. I don't know. I guess, do we do the dedication of merit? We usually do, right?
Just want to
Yeah.
make an announcement.
Yeah.
The Westchester Buddhist Center, which is a kind of sister organization, is having its yearly one-week meditation retreat at Garrison Institute, February 17th to 24th. There are some scholarships available for partly or partial scholarships. And that all is explained on the WestchesterBuddhistCenter.org website. So I encourage you to go. And it's a wonderful experience. And we are letting people who have done a one-week retreat in the past come up just for the last weekend. But if you haven't, then we're not, because we want people who can just sort of absorb in without a lot of education. And this year we had to go Sunday to Sunday. In other years we've gone Friday to Friday, which allowed us to take the first weekend and let people come and give everybody the same orientation, and then people would leave. We can't do that this year, so it's going to be the last weekend. People can come on a Friday morning and then leave Sunday in the afternoon if they wish, only if they've had another week experience.
Having been having done, I think it was the first Westchester Buddhist week retreat that we did at the Dharma Center back in the day. I am a very big proponent of it. I think it's awesome. It's a great way to deepen your practice. If you've never done a week retreat, I don't know if everybody here has, but and I also, I got to say, I love even going up to Westchester Buddhist Center. I haven't done it in a long time now, but on a Sunday morning for the Dharma talks that you do on Sunday mornings are great. It's like an easy train ride up to Irvington. It's beautiful up there. You're on the Hudson. It's a wonderful space and great teachers. So if you're ever looking for something to do something dharmic to do on a Sunday, I think it's a great thing in addition to the week-long meditations. A great way to deepen the practice. So, all right. By this merit, may all attain ambitions, may it defeat the enemy of wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. The ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. It says.